think it seems like we're good to go now. Well,
Yeah.
anyway, it's great to meet you. I'm super excited to be able to talk to you, and
Yeah, good to meet you as well.
hear, and share more of your story. So for those of you who don't know Dylan, he's basically been, traveling the world and exploring alternative spaces, and that's really, I call our channel Underground Living, but in a way that talks about different ways of living, not just living underground, even though we are renovating a bunker. It's about alternative ways of living. And Dylan really is almost an expert in that. So I'm excited to talk to you about your adventures that you've had.
Thank you.
Probably much more adventurous than my life will ever be.
Thank you. I'm very excited as well to be here.
Yeah. So, talk to me about, FLORB is your channel and your company. And tell me about talk to me about it. Like, how did it get started? Where did it come from? What motivated you and inspired you to kind of go and do what you do and explain to people what it is you do?
Yeah. So FLORB is, like you said, my YouTube channel, and the word FLORB is a contraction of the two words floating orb, because we live on a floating orb in space, and I think that's kind of weird. And so I started FLORB, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years ago. As it is in its current iteration, I've been working on creating YouTube channels for, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years now. And the first few years, nothing really worked out. And then I FLORB, which we make short documentaries on alternative styles of living, and the bulk of the video is based around the tour of the living space. So we've got tons and tons of van tours, tons of tiny house tours, tree houses. We did one which was, it's not really a dwelling tour, but it's in England, in Cornwall. So in the UK, in Cornwall, there's this place called the Eden Project, and there's these two big geodesic biodomes where they created a rainforest in one and a Mediterranean climate in another. So that I did a video on that and did a whole tour of the facility. And so that's what it is. It's kind of alternative styles of living and alternative projects, generally focused around sustainability, small living, and whatnot. But we also have other things that aren't necessarily tiny or whatnot. So that's the channel. The way it got started is, excuse me, I was traveling for a few years. I was traveling out of a backpack for about 6 months, and then I bought a van. And I bought a van because I was tired of traveling out of a backpack, but I didn't want to stop traveling. And so I wanted to figure out some way to make that work. And so I thought, well, I could buy a van and travel in a van. That would probably work. And this is back when van life was kind of new. Like on the subreddit of van dwellers, there was only about, I think, 30,000 people in the group, and now it's well over popular. And so I bought the van and then drove that back to Kansas City, where I'm from, and spent a month building it out and converting it into a place that I could live and travel. And then I started traveling and filming all these different tours and tiny houses and vans. And from there, it's just kind of blossomed into a company where now we've got four people working on the channel. And okay, and somewhere in there, a boat got involved. Is that? Yeah. So at the moment, I live on a sailboat. So I was traveling around and living in my van for almost 2 years, about 20 months, maybe a little bit longer. And my van, I couldn't stand up in my van. So it was a conversion van. So it was a little bit taller than a normal van, but not like a Sprinter. And so I was living in that, and I couldn't stand up in it. And I was starting to get very uncomfortable with that. And so it was the very similar story as where with the backpack, I was like, I want to keep traveling, but I'm tired of living out of a backpack. This was like, okay, I want to keep traveling, but I need more space. So I was like, well, I can either get a bigger van, a bus, or I could move on to a sailboat. And sailboat sounded like the most fun and challenging thing. And so that's what I decided to do. So I had made that decision in about November of, I don't remember the exact year. And then by May of the next year, so about 6 months later, I was on this boat that I'm on right now, and now I've been on here for 3 years.
I don't know if there's more space than you can feel than being out in the middle of an ocean on a small boat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Especially out in the middle of the sea at night. Yeah, when you're out in the middle of the sea at night, it's just the stars above, and you're like, oh, I guess that's infinity. So, and there's no land to be seen. That's about as open as it can get.
Yeah, yeah. And so like did all of this start like from a young age? Were you always interested in traveling in alternative spaces? Like was there something in your life that kind of sparked that interest for you?
Well, probably in high school, I guess. So around 2011, 2012, something like that, I was getting obsessed with tiny houses. They were kind of the only videos that I would watch on YouTube was tiny houses. And there was only really one person making videos on tiny houses at the time, which was Kirsten Dirksen. And so I would watch lots and lots of her videos, and that's what got me interested in the tiny houses and small living. And so from there, like I said, I started traveling, and it wasn't a few years later that I decided to move into the van and then starting these alternative living spaces. But that was kind of my introduction into the whole idea of tiny living, because I was in the mindset of like, how is it possible that somebody gets whatever $250,000-$300,000 to buy a house like when you're young? Like that was just kind of crazy to me. And I'd learned about student loans and everything like that, and I realized that the American system is a debt-based system, and it's built on debt, and it encourages people to incur giant sums of debt. And I wasn't really interested in that, and so I ended up dropping out of community college. I didn't even go to university, but I dropped out of community college. But before that, when I realized the kind of debt-based economy and culture that we had, I came across the tiny houses, and it was like, okay, a tiny house, let's say, is going to cost you around $30,000. And for me, I was like, okay, $30,000 is a lot of money, but that's like actually doable. That's something that I could achieve in a relatively short amount of time. That's not, you don't have to get a 15-30 year loan in order to have something that's your own that you can live in. And so that's what really got me interested in the whole realm of alternative living and in these alternative styles of housing and small housing and sustainable housing. But when I was younger, I did a little bit of some traveling, not like an insane amount of traveling, but I did a good amount, I guess. Like when I was in by the end of my high school career, whatever you call it, I had gone to Honduras 3 different times, and that I did that when I was associated with the church. We went down there for church things, and before that, I had my mother took me to Amsterdam, to the Netherlands. We did a trip to the Netherlands because my sister, she was lucky enough to be part of this organization, and they went over there to play soccer. And so my mother and I were like, let's go check that out. We can watch her play soccer, and we can go see this country. And then that we had just taken a few mamas and whatnot, but and we would take family vacations around the nation, like to Texas or to Florida or to Colorado, were kind of our main 3 states. But other than that, that was it. It's not like we did not like every year we went abroad or something like that. By the time I was in high school, I'd only been to, I guess, 4 different countries: the U.S., Canada, Honduras, and the Netherlands.
I don't know if Canada counts, but
Yeah.
I used to live.
I've been to our neighbors.
Yeah, I used to live in Niagara Falls, New York, and so like going to Canada was, it wasn't a big deal. Like you just crossed the bridge and there you were, and it wasn't that different.
Yeah, well, for a long time you didn't even need a passport to cross into Canada and whatnot. But how times have changed.
Yeah. I'm curious, and this is maybe a personal question, because I'm curious, like for like right now in your life, like I just, and maybe you don't want to answer this, you don't have to, but like, do you feel like you're traveling, you're seeing alternative spaces justifies your traveling, or your traveling justifies seeing alternative spaces?
So when I first started traveling, I kind of was aiming to build a like design my life in a way. Like I was like, okay, I want to do a lot of traveling, and I also want to like be able to make money because I was completely broke at the time. And I also wanted to do YouTube. Like I had made a decision that YouTube was going to be the career path for me, and I was going to figure it out. And this is back before all I was doing was losing money. I wasn't making any money. And so with that, I had mentioned about how I had been traveling for a while before I landed on the alternative living spaces. And it was something that, like, when I kind of realized that it would all kind of work together, I was like, this makes sense. This will work. So I was traveling before I started filming the alternative living spaces.
Were you feeling like this is like your authentic self because you're bringing the things that were like you were most interested in all together into kind of one thing?
I don't know if I would say it's my authentic self, because in a sense, I don't even know what that means. Like I just do things I'm interested in.
Okay, so you found YouTube, you found traveling, you found alternative spaces, you brought it all together. What was the journey, I guess, at that point? And it's a hard thing to do. It's hard to make a living out of social media, YouTube, TikTok, whatever platform you're on. It's an uphill battle for sure. So I'd love to hear more about that journey.
Yeah, I think the whole social media career path now is insanely popular, right? It's like the modern day gold rush, and it's from what I understand, it's what kids today want to do, is have a social media job. And because of that, and because it does allow for so much, right? Like you're able to live amazing lifestyles if you can figure out how to make it work. But because of that, I think people don't have a realistic understanding of like what all it actually takes to make it happen. It's a lot of work behind the scenes, and it's a type of job that it's just you've always got to be creating more content, more videos, more photo, whatever platform you're on. It's a never-ending beast that you have to continue to feed. And if you don't do that, then you fall behind very quickly. But if you do that and you do it well, then the algorithm obviously rewards you. And so my journey through that was when I was living in the van. So before I started the alternative living space, I had mentioned that I had been making videos before that. And at one point I had done the daily vlogging, and I think I had my max was like, I did like 75 days in a row or something crazy like that. And that was when I really learned the difficulty and the grind that it can take in order to figure out how to make it work, and the amount of energy that you need for that. And so I had that experience, and I had made the decision, like, this is what I'm going to do. Now I just need to figure it out. It's a lot of work, but I'll figure it out. So once I switched to making the alternative living videos, I was in the van and I was traveling. And so I was posting once a week. And so I think in the very beginning, I had like 3 videos backlogged, and then that I burned through that very quickly. And I then was like, every week I was like, okay, I need to find a place to film. I need to schedule it. I need to go film it. And then I need to edit it so I can post it on the following week. And I need to drive there. And so for the first, I mean, basically my whole time in the van I was working. I was very focused on working. When I got into the van, I was also interested in rock climbing. I was like, okay, sweet. I'll be living in the van. I'll be traveling. I do rock climbing, blah, blah. And I quickly realized, oh no, I just have to work all the time. And so that's what it was. Like, it wasn't anything super glamorous. I mean, I was living in a van, a single guy living in a van that he couldn't stand up in, traveling around and filming and editing. And so I spent many days in Starbucks just editing away, or in different coffee shops. And so I went through that grind, and then once I switched to filming alternative living spaces, it still wasn't for a whole nother, let's say, 8 to 10 months before it was financially viable for me. And by financially viable, I mean financially viable for a single guy living in a van to cover his basic needs. So like, I was living in a super cheap lifestyle. And so it was January the next year. I think it was like June or July that I posted the first alternative living space video. And then it was January the next year that I first made like $1,000 in a month. And I was like, sweet. That's actually something that I can live off of if I'm living this style of life. And so from there, it was finally building. So it was a long process of not making money and working for, if you got to do 8 months of the 50 hours weeks before you start making money, that's going to discourage a lot of people to get into the space. And I'm sure there's easier ways to do it. I mean, that's just how I ended up doing it. And then from there, it was just about consistency and continuing on posting and filming and working and building it up until it is where it is now, which is still in the process of building.
I've heard that like business owners are the only ones that will work 80 hours a week so they don't have to work 40.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You work 80 hours a week so you don't have to work 40, and you don't make any money for a long time.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I do know. I mean, like, basically, like, social media, it's like the new, like, sports pros, right? Like, when I was a kid, everyone wanted to be the basketball or football, player. That was their dream, and I'm sure there's still a lot of kids that have that dream. But I think that the new dream for a lot of kids is, hey, I want to be on YouTube, I want to be on TikTok, I want to be, and I was talking to someone who was, realized how many followers I had. And she's like, ooh, you could make me famous.
Yeah.
You could just see the wheels turning in her head.
Yeah.
She's just thinking, this could be my shot. This is my way in.
Yeah.
But I think, it's cool. But I think with all of those, sports, actors, celebrities, social media, people don't realize like how much work and grind and sacrifice that's made actually getting to that point and continuing, not just getting to the point, but maintaining that,
Yeah.
That status, right? Like football players, they don't stop practicing, they don't stop working out, like, or, and the same with people who run a business or whatever. You don't just stop. Like it's
Yeah.
never like a point where you're just like, oh, okay, now it's all done. I can sit back.
Yeah. 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 It's definitely the hardest thing that I've ever done, is trying to run a business in a YouTube channel. And now I have two different YouTube channels that I'm running side by side. So we've got the alternative living spaces, and then we have one that's focused on sailing, adventure, and lifestyle as well. So that's on YouTube. It's just under self-titled Dylan Magaster. If you search Dylan Magaster, it'll come up with both FLORB and Dylan Magaster, both channels. But so now I'm running both of those alongside, and it is by far the most difficult thing I've ever done or tried to do. But it's the only way that I would be able to live the lifestyle that I live, and because of that, I'm grateful. But nobody ever. It's not supposed to be easy, first of all. But like you were saying, with actors and professional athletes and everything like that, like they work insanely hard, and you don't see the grind behind the scenes. But what you also don't see is the hundreds of millions of kids that were in on a high school basketball team and wanted to go pro, and they didn't, because they just didn't have, they weren't tall enough, they weren't good enough, they didn't have the drive, like whatever it was that they wanted to, but they couldn't. Weren't able to make it happen. Like, you don't see all of that as well. And on social media, it's the exact same thing. Everybody's got an Instagram account, a TikTok account, a YouTube channel, a podcast. Like, everybody's got one, it seems like these days. But it's not the amount that are able to figure out how to make it viable, long-term and sustainable, is a much smaller number. And there's all sorts of different reasons for that. Part of it's luck, part of it's hard work, part of it's intelligent strategy, and part of it's just timing. Like if you get in at the right time and you're the right person at the right time, then you get to ride a wave. But there's all sorts of different factors, but it's definitely difficult. But I can't complain. I'm pretty happy with how it's working out so far.
Yeah, with all the sacrifice, I think you almost enjoy the sacrifice because of the few little perks that it gives you. Sometimes it's just like, hey, I might work 80 hours, but I can kind of get up when I want and work when I want, and not do the things I don't want to do. So the payoff's much higher. So I'm also curious, because you've seen a lot of stuff traveling around. Again, I think you probably already I'm 45, and you've probably seen more of the world than I probably ever will. And that's okay with me. I'm not a huge, I'm not really, I don't have that desire, I think, that to travel, right? Like I do like alternative spaces. I don't mind traveling a bit. I do like to see things. I like to help people. But I'm not like, let's go here, let's go there, let's, vacation. To me is more like, let's get together with family. That to me is probably higher on my priority list. But I'd love to, have you tell people about some of the coolest places you've seen, because they may be in a situation where I am, where they may not have an opportunity or maybe a desire to travel, but they're interested in knowing about some of these places that you've seen. I don't know, craziest places, coolest places. I mean, and guys, like if you want to know more about like alternative spaces, FLORB's a great place to go. And again, like Dylan was saying, it's not just tiny spaces or van life. He's gone out there and just seen a ton of alternative living spaces. And if you're, I think also if you have that drive, because I've had a drive to, do what I'm doing, right, for 7 years until it actually happened. My kids were small. And so people ask my kids sometimes, what do your kids think about buying and renovating an underground bunker? Their reaction when it happened was, well, it's about time. I mean, really, because they were tiny when like the whole like idea kind of became part of our like, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to make this happen. But like, I'd love to hear about like what, some of those places you've seen. This is what I was going to say earlier was, the cool thing I think about your channel is that it sparks ideas. Right. And so if you're interested in alternative spaces at all, and you're looking for a place to spark ideas, I think FLORB is a great place to go for that, because it really has a wide variety and can really get your brain thinking about like, oh, well, I could do this and I could do that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm still surprised many times when I see a van or a tiny house or something like that, and I go, huh, I've never seen that before. Like, I mean, I don't know how many I've filmed. I've filmed close to 100 or maybe more. And there's still many times where I go, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea. I didn't think about that.
I was watching, previously your one about, I guess the person who had taken a Volkswagen van and they had put the solar panel on top, and it was like, it was literally a week before that I saw that video that I was talking to someone, and I'm like, no, you can't run a car on a solar panel. It doesn't make enough energy. And then I saw your video and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong about that.
Yeah, you're talking about Brett Beelan. If his company is a solar roller, and he's got 2 of them now. So he did. Well, I think he's got 3. He's got the original Volkswagen, like an old school combi that he could put solar panels on the whole top and made an awning that comes out on both sides, and the whole thing tilts so he can track the sun with it. And he was able to get, I don't remember the range he was able to get with that. And then he did an E-Star. So an E-Star is one of the original electric vehicles. They made kind of like UPS truck style trucks that were electric. So they had a big battery bank at the bottom, and they were used mainly in cities in short range. So he took one of those because it had much more real estate on the roof, and he converted one of those into a solar array that we also filmed. And I can't remember the Instagram handle for the guy they're traveling around. They're going from Alaska all the way down to Argentina, I think is their plan, all on solar power. And that he also did another one where it's similar as the first one, like a Volkswagen with the solar panels on top for a musician. But that one was definitely one of the cooler ones that I've seen, where you go like, huh, didn't know that was possible.
Yeah, absolutely. For people who may want to start getting into traveling or are interested in alternative spaces, I mean, do you have any advice for people like that as far as like where they should start?
Yeah, so for alternative living spaces, if you're interested in doing that, I mean, the best place to start is just by gathering ideas online, and FLORB is a great resource for that, and YouTube as a whole and just social media as a whole is a great resource for that, to figure out what is it you want. You want a van? Do you want a bus? Do you want a tiny house? Do you want a bunker? Do you want a tree house? house? Do you want a earth bag dome? Like, what is it you want? If you're interested in that, the first thing is to start with figuring out what is it that you actually want, and what's your hierarchy of needs. Is travel and mobility at the top? Because if it is, then obviously a bunker isn't going to work for that. Is space at the top? Because if it is, then a van is not going to work for that. So you got to figure out what are the hierarchy, your hierarchy of values, and what you want in a living space. And then from there, you can move on and start taking the steps, the practical steps of then designing and then purchasing and building, and however it is the process that you want to do. But yeah, for alternative spaces, start gathering ideas and start saving money. And then as far as travel goes, the way that I first got into traveling was I got in through travel hacking. So that was via credit cards. You get a credit card and then you fulfill the incentive in the beginning, and then you get a large bonus in miles. And the only way that it works is if you pay off your credit card every month and you don't accrue debt. But by doing that, it's called travel hacking. You can accrue a large amount of miles and then get cheap flights. So for example, my flight from Kansas City to Paraguay, I think was $17. And I was able to do that through travel hacking. So that's a great way to get into traveling. The other I think best thing to do is just start traveling locally.
I'm not quite familiar with travel hacking. This is actually the first time I've heard about it. So you get a credit card, and they have certain like requirements, like spending requirements or other things, but you try to fulfill those quicker than. Is that what you're saying?
So if you get a credit card, it depends. There's a great website called NerdWallet that has it all laid out as far as all the different credit cards and all the different bonuses. But generally, if you get a credit card, they have what's called a minimum spend, and it's normally the first 90 days. So let's say that minimum spend is $4,000 in the first 90 days that you get the credit card. And then once you get that, they say, okay, now you get 100,000 United frequent flyer miles or something like that. And so the way you do it is you go, okay, I've got a big purchase coming up. I'm going to buy a camera, or I'm going to buy a laptop. And you go, what credit card best suits what I'm trying to do as far as travel, because they have different incentives and different rewards. And you go, okay, I'm going to apply for this credit card. You get the credit card. You then put your purchase on the credit card. So your camera, whatever, $3,000, $5,000. And then you wait for the statement to post, so that you don't want to pay off the credit card before the statement posts. You let the statement post, and then you pay off the full balance. So you don't you don't have any interest accrued. It's just you pay the exact same price, and then you get the 100,000 miles. And then if you decide you don't want to keep that credit card, because sometimes credit cards have an annual fee, then you cancel the credit card. And so you can do this with multiple different credit cards, and you can quickly build up a giant amount of frequent flyer miles. And there's a whole nother realm called churning, which is basically, there's very few credit card companies that allow this anymore, but sometimes you can do the same, like, okay, you get one credit card, you do the minimum spend, you get the reward, you cancel it, you get the same credit card again, you do the minimum spend, but there's not very many of those. So if you want to get into churning, that's a whole nother deep dive, and I'm not super familiar with that. But that's what travel hacking is with credit cards. There's other ways to go about doing it with travel hacking. I don't know if couch surfing is necessarily considered travel hacking, but when I first started traveling in South America, I did a lot of couch surfing, and just different ways to figure out how to travel on a budget. So when I went to South America, I had $1,000, and that was all I had. And like I said, the ticket to get down there was only 17.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. I don't know if I want to tell my wife about that because she probably has more desire to travel than me. But I never heard about that. That's super fascinating.
Yeah. The key thing with travel hacking and credit cards is you have to pay off your balance at the end of the month. If you allow it to accrue interest, you are no longer travel hacking. You are going into debt, and it is the exact opposite of what you want to do. So I just want to make that clear. Like,
yeah,
if you're going to go for it, you have to know that you can pay off the statement balance.
So is there, I mean,
like a responsible adult.
is there any, you know, we basically use our credit cards the same way. Like we're not really, I don't think we think about travel miles, but we just do it to pay off our credit. So we buy stuff that we know are going to buy anyway, and then pay it off. And as soon as the bill comes in. So we're on board.
Well, then that's the other end of travel hacking, besides just the is like the credit card, depending on, put everything onto a credit card, and then I always pay it off at the end of the month. And the reason for that is because every dollar that I spend, I get like 1 frequent flyer mile or 1.5 frequent flyer mile. So it's like, I'm going to spend all this money anyway, whether it's on food or whatever. So might as well at least get some sort of reward for it. Because the credit card company, the bank, their whole view on it is they want to encourage you to spend money, so then you spend more than you have, so then you end up in debt with them. But if you understand that that's the game and you play it correctly and you don't go into debt, then you get rewarded for that. So like you, I put everything onto a credit card and then I pay it off at the end of the month.
Do you have to worry about, like, with getting multiple credit cards, do you have to worry about like that hurting your credit score? Like, it's because every time you get a new credit card, they're going to ping your credit score, and maybe it's not big enough of a deal to worry about.
In the beginning, it's a little bit depends on like what your credit score is, but in the very beginning, it can be a little bit of a ding on your credit. But as long as you never miss a payment, right? Like as long as you always make your payments on time, then you build up your credit. And over time, so let's say in the beginning you get 3 credit cards. Okay, so maybe your credit dips for a month or 2 months. Okay, don't go buy a house and don't get a loan in those 2 months. But then after that, it's going to recover and go up even more because you're then building your credit and living out that you are a responsible person that can borrow money and pay it back in the proper amount of time. And that's how you build your credit. But so in the very beginning, you can have slight issues with that, but it's really short and temporary.
Gotcha.
So unless you of course start missing your payments.
Right. Now that's an awesome tip for those who want to get out more and travel more without actually spending any additional money. So like, if people who think, oh, I can't afford to travel like Dylan does, there you go. Now you can, but be responsible. Yeah. Don't go into debt and come back and say Ruben and Dylan said I should get into debt. No, that's not what we're saying.
No.
So, we don't have a ton more time. I don't want to keep you, but like I'd love to hear more about how, about FLORB and the transition into a business. And, I'm sure I know, from just knowing about your channels, it's not all about what YouTube pays you either. Like you have sponsors and you have other things, how did that transition happen? Mm-hmm. And anyway, I just, if you could talk about that, I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, so like I said, when I first started YouTube, it was a pretty conscious decision that I was going to figure out how to make it into a livelihood and into a career. And so in the beginning, that was all based off of YouTube ad revenue. And I'm like, there's plenty of people out there that are much better about how to get every revenue stream going possible and how to make the most money possible. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that know how to make a living with only 20,000 subscribers or 30,000 subscribers, and they've got all sorts of different systems for that. But for me, in the beginning, and then I started getting into the sponsored videos, and so by far the majority of the revenue is through some sort of advertisement, whether that's through what's built into the YouTube platform or through brand deals that we also get. But then we have other revenue streams as well, as far as Patreon. And then if we were in the process of developing merchandising and things like that to start providing products for people and providing services for people. But that's how it started, at least with ad revenue. And then building that into a business, it's been just a very, very slow, organic process of, okay, so it's just me for a long time, and then start bringing on people like, okay, now need to train somebody how to do all the filming and the editing. And now we've got 2 people that can both shoot and edit. Okay, now we need to bring on somebody else that can do more of the back end business work and not necessarily the creative work. And how do we build that out? And then how do we expand into other types of content and different platforms and all that kind of stuff? So it's a very slow process, and I'm sure that there's plenty of people that are much more savvy than I am when it comes to building out a business. But this is the first business I've ever built, and it's a business that's based off of a creative product, right? A video. We're not making sunglasses and selling sunglasses. So there's not like a real great rule book of how to go about doing it, because it's a creative endeavor in the first place.
Yeah, no. I really admire entrepreneurs, like that they, put themselves out there. It's a grind and it's difficult. And I remember having, Christmases with our kids where all of their gifts came from the dollar store. I think as my son got older, I think he said, I remember thinking, Santa gets a lot of his gifts from Dollar Tree.
Yeah. Come on, Santa.
But I think there's something innately within someone who wants to do that it's okay. Like it's all right. And you can just kind of push forward and figure it out. And it's like, okay, there's ups and downs, and there's not a steady check every week or every month or whatever. But again,
it all depends.
Those 80 hours.
Yeah, it all depends on the person's like personality and disposition, because like as you were saying before, you're not necessarily inclined to full-time travel, and that's perfectly fine. People are different, people have different interests, and people have different core values that drive them to do different things. And so when it comes to like entrepreneurship, it's a type of person that is interested in doing that, and like you said, interested in putting in all of those hours. And it's not for everybody, and it's not, because if you're going to do something entrepreneurial, you have to be pretty comfortable with risk and understand how to take risk and be able to deal with the stress that comes alongside that. And people have different tolerances for taking risks and the ability to manage that. So it's all just dependent on the person, and people are different, and so different things suit different people. Sounds like a church is going off.
Church is in session. And I think that's also one of the great things about your channel is because I think it shows people. Maybe, I don't know if we should wait for that to. Oh, there it is. Okay. I think it shows people that, you know what, if you're tired of the 9 to 5, it doesn't even necessarily have to be an entrepreneurial endeavor. A lot of it comes from, well, what can I reduce from my life, right? How can I more minimize like my needs and the other things from my life and live more minimally, so that maybe I don't have to work so many hours. Maybe I can get a different job that maybe, you know what, doesn't pay as much, but it fits a better lifestyle that I want. Or maybe there is something I can do, you know, sustainably, where I don't, you know, hardly even need much of a job at all. So I think that's one of the cool things about your channel, is that you can really see, you know, practically how people are like, hey, look, I've got $10,000. I'm going to build this tire home. I've got, you know, I can get this much money, or I can borrow this much money, or I've saved up this much money. I can build my tiny home for this. And you know what, even if, and there are companies out there which will give you a mortgage for a tiny home. And, you know, if you don't have to stretch it out over 30 years, but if you do, you can, like, your payments could be like a few $100 a month. And so you can maybe quit the job that you hate, or quit doing the stuff that, you know, is kind of not good for you or doesn't appeal to you or whatever. So I think that's I think the exciting part, and why I definitely recommend everyone go to FLORB, check out Dylan's stuff, his other channel. Also, I don't want to butcher your last name, but you know, it's just Dylan Magaster. That's correct, right? Okay, yeah. So go to Dylan.
Nailed it.
Dylan Magaster. You know, if you're interested in sailing and stuff, like, honestly, that's, you know, that scares me, but I think I would be open to doing it just because it scares me. I mean, I've been on larger boats, but imagining being on a small boat, I mean, because, you know, I think, you know, people, because I have a bunker, a lot of people want to talk to me about, like, you know, survival and prepping and stuff like that. And you know what? It's hard not to have a bunker and not think about that kind of stuff. That wasn't my motivation for getting it. I'm not predicting any doomsday scenario or anything. I think one of the things that people like, and people think, oh, well, you got to protect yourself and, you know, robbers and all these things. And I think people don't realize that the thing you have to be most scared of is nature. Nature will destroy you way sooner than people will. And it'll do it without like remorse or like feeling bad or second guessing itself. And so, like, to imagine myself being out in the middle of the ocean would definitely remind me how scary nature can be, I think.
Yeah, it's real. It's real for sure. And it's something that even when I was first traveling, I mean, I'd go out into these different beautiful places in South America or something like that. I'd go hiking or something, but I would always, you know, end up in a hostel, or always end up back in some sort of town or a village and in a house. And so because of that, you would have, you know, if a storm came through, it's like, oh, look, it's raining outside. But there's not that raw confrontation with it, opposed to, like, just a week and a half ago, there was a thunderstorm and we're on anchor, and it's like, all right, it's storming out. So it's like time to pay attention, make sure nothing goes crazy, make sure nothing goes wrong. Like, we continue doing what we're doing, but it takes center stage because now the boat's moving on anchor. The boat's getting blown around, and it's raining, there's lightning, and there's thunder and all those things. And so it turns it into an event, one that's exciting. You know, there's always like a tiny bit of concern of like, let's see how this goes. So, you know, we'll be able to figure it out and handle it, but like, we're going to see what happens. It's very upfront and in your face and engaging. And so, I mean, like, I keep track of the weather and the forecast and everything like that, which you need to do. But the the raw experience with nature is something that I like about the lifestyle, and it gives you a whole different perspective on it because, you know, when if you're living in a city or you're living in a suburb or something like that, and I've done both those things. That's a ferry. Sorry about that. The ferry's leaving. Then if you're living in a city or you're living in a suburb, which I've done both things, you are very insulated from the natural world. And that's intentional in the design because the natural world is dangerous. Like, you don't want bears wandering through the streets, right? Like, you want to have a community that is safe and can live out their life and have children and build a community and family and all of those things without fear of natural disaster or a lion coming in and eating everybody. So if you take a step to live in a van or live in a boat or go backpacking or something like that, you end up putting yourself back into the rest of the world, which is the majority of it. And you get confronted with the things that were of much more importance to, let's say, our ancestors, whether it was ancient people or hunter-gatherers or even just people before the engine, before gasoline, before electricity. Weather and weather patterns and what nature is doing was much more significant in their life than it is to us when we have electricity and we have cars and everything like that. Like, if you didn't have a car and it's snowing out or it's raining out, it's like, maybe we're not going to go anywhere today because I don't want to, saddle up the horse. The same thing with electricity. Like, okay, we need to go chop some wood to keep the house warm.
Yeah, we're in a very, I think, the words you use is sanitized. We're in a very sanitized kind of world. We're insulated from the dangers of every day. I'm sure, like, in the past, that people would come back from hunting and they'd be like, "Oh, where's Bill?" And "Oh yeah, he got eaten by the bear," and it'd just be like, that's just something that happens. Right. And now, like, things like that happen and we lose our minds because we think, oh my goodness, like this is crazy. And we forget that was, more common day. And it's, relatively recently that we've been able to isolate ourselves from those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, like, right now I'm in Greece and I've been traveling to Greece. One of the interesting things with experiencing nature and experiencing the wind and the water and the storms is that if I read about Odysseus or Achilles or any of the ancient stories and they talk about sailing and moving, and I can look around and I can see the geography, which is more or less exactly the same, and then I can experience the weather and be like, wow, this is exactly the same as something they would have experienced back then. There's not nature, weather patterns, sure, they're changing as things change with the climate, but it's still more or less the same thing that they experienced thousands of years ago. And so if you read history or mythology or things like that, and especially if you're in a place like this, like in Greece, where the whole culture is saturated in that, you end up going like, this is what they meant when they said the wine dark sea in the Odyssey, or the different things of the natural phenomena. It's still the same.
So what was your scariest moment, like, at sea? I mean, have you had like sort of like I may die today kind of moments?
The worst was probably still it happened probably month 2 that I moved onto the boat. I did a sail across France. It was like it was supposed to be around a 24-hour sail, and it ended up turning into about a 36-hour sail because this is kind of hard to explain just with words if you don't know anything about boats. So on the back of my boat, I've got a metal structure that I use to pick up my smaller boat, the dinghy. Those are called davits. So the davits hold the dinghy up out of the water so you don't have to tow it behind you. So I was sailing and I had the dinghy up on the davits, and I had the engine for the dinghy inside of the dinghy instead of mounted to the sailboat. So that was a big mistake. And as I was sailing, these davits, they weren't fashioned very well. They were custom made, and the people who made them did not. There were some clear design flaws. Just, you know, I was like, they're metal workers. They know what they're doing. But so anyway, we're sailing and it's pretty big wind and pretty big water. Let's say somewhere around 3 meters, 10 foot waves. And the davits break. And so now they're attached to the deck, the top of the boat, and attached back to the boat. Attached to the back of the boat, it sheared on both sides. So now the whole thing is like hanging, dangling, and we're in the middle of the sea, 50 miles from the nearest shore, which if you're in a car, 50 miles is far, but it's, you know, only a couple hours. On a boat, 50 miles is like 10 hours on a sailboat. It's really far away. And so, like I said, we're dealing with like 10 foot waves, and something to breaking off completely of the boat. And long story short, it ended up flipping over, and I lost into the knee and attach it to the boat and tow up and to get there. And so that was.
You're breaking up a little bit on me. Oh wait, there we go. You're.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so I think I started losing you a little bit at 10 foot waves. Things start breaking. So your dinghy's like coming off.
Yeah, so the davits, yeah, so it's swinging off the back, and yeah, the waves are somewhere between 7 foot, probably, and so I have to lower the dinghy into the water. And long story short is the dinghy is being towed behind the boat and I still had the engine for the dinghy in the dinghy, which is just really dumb. But I was very new to sailing at that time. And so the dinghy ended up flipping over. So I lost the engine in the sea, and it was like, I think it was like 3,000 foot deep there. So somewhere off the coast of France, 3,000 foot down, there's an engine for a dinghy. If anybody finds it, please return. And so I ended up having to flip the dinghy over again to right it, and that was really hard. And yeah, so then we were able to tow the dinghy behind the boat, and it took like 12 extra hours than it was supposed to. And that was all really hard and pretty scary. There wasn't a point in that I was worried about actually dying. Like I didn't think this situation was dangerous in the sense that we would lose our lives, but I was definitely aware that if I messed up enough, it could get to that point. So like, for example, at one point I had the dinghy towing behind the boat, and I had to get inside of the dinghy in order to, I don't remember, change some ropes around. And so at that point, it's like, okay, now I have to either unclip myself from the sailboat. It's just a weird thing to be out in the middle of the sea and be climbing off of the sailboat into a smaller boat and being like, all right, well, this is big wind and big water. So, if I fell in and wasn't attached to the boat, we would have some serious problems. But I was able to
just like
avoid
month.
the.
That was just
that was like month number 2. Yeah. Yeah, but I've learned a lot since then, and
Yeah.
the reason that was so terrible is mainly all my fault. I made a bunch of mistakes that led up to that, and I've learned a lot since then. And so, luckily, I haven't had anything worse than that. And knock on wood, I won't.
Yeah.
The plan is now to, when I encounter big wind and big water, I know what I'm doing, and I have experience, and I know how to properly handle this situation so we don't end up in a terrible situation like that again.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. That's awesome, man. And then, so I think that's probably, if that happens at the beginning and that's the worst that it gets, I think that probably helps you feel like you can keep going. Whoops, we lost you for a second again. See if we get caught up. Oh, okay.
Good golly.
All right. Well, hey,
Good golly.
I mean, that's scary. I had a friend who was selling his boat, and he took the guy who was going to buy it out on the boat and everything, and they came back, and the boat sunk in the harbor.
Oh.
And he said to him, well, and they got in, they bailed it out, and they, pumped it out, and, I think a pump had failed or something. But they got it done, and it was kind of stressful. And then they went out to dinner, like to eat afterwards. And he's like, so that's the worst thing that could probably ever happen to you. And you already did it. So like, you want to buy this boat? And he sold the boat.
Nice. That's a great pitch. Yeah. Yeah. He neglected rule number one. Rule number one is keep the water out.
Yeah.
If you can do that, if you can do that, then everything else is it's a suggestion. That's the only necessary rule of living on a sailboat, is you have to keep the water out. Other than that, yeah, it's all suggestions.
Right. Well, hey, Dylan, thanks so much. And again, I just want to encourage people, go check out his YouTube channels. Again, it's ideas, it's thoughts. And if you have any desire for alternative spaces, alternative living, you want to get out of the grind, you want to change something in your life, those first steps, I think, like Dylan was saying, is figure out what you want. I've talked to lots of people who said, hey, how can I do what you're doing? I'm like, well, what do you want? Do you want this? Do you want that? And they don't know. And you have to find that first. You have to figure it out, because I could give you ideas and suggestions. Dylan here could give you tons of ideas and suggestions, but until when you figure out what you really want and what your priorities are and what you want to achieve and get away from and all that stuff, you're not going to get anywhere. So definitely check out his channel, both of his channels. And again, thanks so much. It's been fun just hanging out and talking with you. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it, Ruben.
All right, talk to you later.
Thanks.